and see what he can do in the midst of unbelievers, on the leading edge with his word, his power, his grace, and his mercy. For God's sakes, we're Lutheran. This is what we know.
If you're not, then it sounds boring. Like classical music is this way. Like if someone really loves classical music, I should, but I don't. But if someone really loves it, then it cannot be in the background for them. I mean, it grabs them and it holds them and it moves them, and especially with classical music because the beat is always changing. And so you're like, if you're really into it, your heart starts to change rhythm based on how fast or slow it is. And there's all this dynamic stuff. But if you're not into it, it just sort of fades into the background, and our ears are for the more throbbing kind of rock and roll stuff or whatever. So the same is with theology. So the old stuff, if you're into it, man, it gets a hold of you. But if you can't tune into it, it seems cold, even though it's the opposite of that. But it feels cold to us,
No, yeah, totally. Like you're saying, you could say the exact same thing, but just the way you say it and the tone, the tempo of your speech, it conveys something totally different to a newer generation. And it's like, I didn't invent none of this. You know what I'm saying? It's literally in this book.
Yeah, that's right. I've been republishing some Luther stuff, and I thought everyone would just read it and love it because that's how I am. I'm like, ooh. I just, it sets my imagination on fire. And then I'll give it to people, smart people, engineers and philosophers, and they'll read it, and it seems cold to them. So it's one of the questions that I'm always trying to drive through is how do we just take the old theology and how do we cook it with spice? How do we grind it up and grill it and put some barbecue sauce on it so that so people can just bite into it and get the same joy?
Same joy. No, 100% true. Because I know, like you mentioned before, how your book about the martyrs, you're just pointing people back to the old, because they might not go read about, various martyrs that you cover. They might not go read their story. But if you can retell it, like for instance, on my channel, we did a little thing where we talked about female saints for motherhood coming up. So we talked about Saint Monica, Augustine's mother. And people were like, oh, man, she was a fervent woman. Like, she prayed where her son was out there with the mannequins. Oh, man, I can relate. We're like, yeah, man, this is like a historic story. Like, this isn't, you know what I'm saying? Like, we didn't just come up with this. You know what I'm saying? Like, right. Yeah. But if you represent it, people do find value in it.
Yeah.
That's why I love the notion of your book in the sense of how it talks about their faith. Because a lot of people think that the older saints are like dead faith or things of that nature. And for you just to cover it in the sense where you talk about suffering and things of that nature and what we could learn, I think it's beautiful, and people really need to change their perspective on those type of things.
It's another problem of evolution. So we talked about what was the first live evolution we were talking about earlier? I already forgot, but the